There's nothing in plants or fungus that you have that you cannot get from meat. But there are things in meat that you have to have that you cannot get from plants.
I'm honored to have Dr. Anthony Chaffee on the channel this week. How you doing, Dr. Chaffee?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thanks so much for doing this. I'm really excited for this. So one thing that I think keeps a lot of people from starting carnivore is fear. And oftentimes it's irrational fear. And oftentimes it's perpetuated by friends and family. And sometimes they mean well. Sometimes it's their doctors. But I've had so many people leaving various comments or reasons why they're never going to do carnivore, or they don't want to start carnivore, or they're almost going to, but they're not for this reason. And so I've kind of gathered all of those together, and I was hoping to do a video challenging Dr. Chaffee's carnivore diet. So that was going to kind of be the theme of this. Dr. Chaffee, I'm sure everyone here already knows about you, but could you maybe just give us a quick little overview?
Yeah, so I'm an American medical doctor. I'm currently practicing in Australia. I'm a neurosurgical resident, but I've also been studying and deeply investigating diet and nutrition, how that affects health and chronic disease. And I've been looking at that for probably around 25 years since my undergraduate degree. And as a professional athlete, a professional rugby player, All-American rugby player, then as a doctor and treating patients, I've found that for myself, eating this way is absolutely hands down the best for me. It gives me the best nutrition, the best energy. I feel my best. It's easiest. I've never found it easier to put on lean muscle mass and perform athletically than when I'm eating like this. And for my patients, I'm finding that they can significantly improve their health and even reverse many chronic diseases, which people heretofore have thought were incurable. You could just manage them. But the more you look into it, the more you understand that it's really eating the wrong thing outside of our species specific diet that is actually causing these problems. Just like every animal at the zoo or in the wild, they have to eat a very specific diet. And if they eat outside of that diet, they can get sick. And this is why you have signs at the zoo and parks that say, don't feed the animals. It makes them very sick if they don't eat their natural food. So we're doing that as well. We're not eating what we were designed to eat, what we were eating historically, and we're getting very sick from that. And so I've tried to make a YouTube channel and podcast just discussing those sorts of things and showing the evidence for that so people can take a look and look into it more if they wish.
Wonderful. So before we jump into the challenging carnivore questions, although I don't think some of these are probably not going to be too challenging for Dr. Chaffee, but some of these I've heard countless times. I was just wondering, Dr. Chaffee, what made you want to become a doctor and get into medicine?
Oh, I think from a very young age, there were doctors in the family that were, quite well known, had very, very interesting stories. And I was always very interested in that. And so hearing those stories and hearing about those people and the things that they did, starting clinics all over, West Africa and traveling between them and doing cataract surgeries in huts and things like that. And then my great grandfather, becoming a surgeon in the late 1800s and being a second class taught sterile practice at Columbia School of Medicine, and still to date being the youngest ever graduate from Columbia School of Medicine. He was like 20 years old. As far as I know, he's still the youngest. And, and hearing those stories about how, this is right when they first invented anesthesia and sterile practice. And so he was really at the ground floor when the modern era of surgery came in, and all the different sorts of stories that he had, passed down, through my parents and grandparents and things like that were just amazing. So I remember thinking about that when I was a kid. I was like, that's a really cool profession, being able to know how the body works and be able to fix people physically with your hands. I thought that was just the most incredible thing that anyone could do. And I also just wanted to know how people worked. I wanted to know what made us tick and how to fix it. And that was just something that interested me from a kid. And then when I was growing up, I was always just interested in, math and sciences. Those were always my favorite subjects. So it just sort of made sense to keep going with that. And I'm very glad I did. It's a wonderful profession. It's difficult to work in for a lot of reasons, but it's very rewarding as well. And so I'm really enjoying it.
You kind of went into medicine to help fix people. Are you starting to feel any more of a calling towards helping people through carnivore nutrition more than neurosurgery, or is it kind of a good balance?
Yeah, it is a good balance, because there's some things that you can't fix with just nutrition. There's a lot It's quite a lot, but there will always be a role for that acute care management. And so, someone falls off a ladder or gets in an accident and they have, an acute brain bleed or some sort of depressed skull fracture, spinal injury, something like that. They need to be fixed. They need surgery. And there are other sorts of issues, cancer, obviously, and other sorts of lesions that can grow. And certainly those can be affected by diet and nutrition as well. But once you have these things, they need to be fixed, and they will need surgery. So I really do like that side of it. But I like being able to help people with actual, underlying, addressing the root cause and having root cause interventions. I don't think it's good enough for us to just put Band-Aids on things and pick up the pieces after things are falling apart and trying to stick the wheels back on after they've fallen off. I think you need to prevent these things. And that's what we've mostly done for thousands of years. Even Hippocrates is quoted as saying, maybe been him, maybe someone else said, let food be thy medicine and medicine thy food. And the ancient Egyptians before that had an old proverb that said, half of what you eat feeds you, half of what you eat feeds your doctor, right? Because you're eating the wrong thing, you're eating too much, and you're getting sick. And so you go see the doctor and you're putting food on his table, right? So, this was a concept that was understood for a very long time. There were numerous books being written about this in the 1800s, all the way up to the 1970s. And, saying that, hey, look, we are carnivores. This is the type of animal that we are. We should be eating this way. And a lot of these chronic diseases that are building up, this is coming from eating the wrong thing. And these things go away if you just stop eating them. So I think you have to do both. You have to have a holistic approach. You have to address these things from that standpoint, getting people actually well, but you also have to be able to pick up the pieces as well, because not everybody's going to be able to stick to that. And also there's just accidents. People have accidents and they have unfortunate things happen to them that they'll need acute care for. And so I really, really enjoy both.
My daughter had open heart surgery, and and she needed the acute care, of course, and now also the carnivore diet has been just instrumental in changing her life more long-term too. So great stuff. All right, why don't we jump into some of these questions? So a lot of these were from my channel, and then yesterday I posted to my YouTube community, and I think I had like 180 people leave comments saying these are reasons that I didn't want to start carnivore. These are things that people have told to me while I did start carnivore. And so I kind of ordered them in terms of rank. So some of these you'll probably just hit out of the park, you've heard before, but I think a lot of people on my channel, they're new to carnivore. And so many of them, again, well, that's one thing I hate in life. I'm only 42 years old. I still have a long way to go, but I used to let fear make too many decisions instead of facts and logic. And so a lot of these are based on fear, but when you get to the truth of the matter, they're not so scary anymore. So here was the first most popular one. You can't possibly just eat meat forever. It's clearly not sustainable. Why not just eat in moderation and maintain a balanced diet?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it depends on what our definition of terms are. I mean, what do they mean? You can't eat it forever. The Inuit do. The Maasai do. Everyone during the Ice Ages did. The Mongols, Genghis Khan, the Mongol horde, they did. And they, were very tall and strong, and they swept across most of Asia and most of Europe, the largest contiguous empire that's ever existed for hundreds of years, and were solely meat-based. Not sustainable. I don't know what they're referring to as far as that's concerned. Maybe they're talking about nutrition. Maybe you're not getting enough vitamins and minerals, but of course you do. We do know that humans actually are carnivores. This is biologically the kind of animal that we are. And there are people that have lived their entire lives and entire generations in different civilizations, currently and historically, that have only ever eaten meat and done so generation after generation after generation. And then, variations between that, some maybe slightly less than 100%, maybe a couple berries here and there. But you can certainly live your entire life eating nothing but meat. You absolutely can. 70% of all animal species do that. In fact, 70% of animals are carnivores. 70% of animals that have ever existed that we know of were carnivores. So, it's actually very easy to turn animal tissue into animal tissue. It's very difficult to turn plant tissue into animal tissue. That's hard. There are only a limited amount of species that have ever been able to adapt to that. Sustainable as far as the environment, well, that's not true either, because it's actually animals that make the environment fertile. So this is what fertilizer is. This is the defecation and urination and respiration of animals, and this recycles nutrients so that plants can have more available, that there's more available in the ground, in the soil, and that you can have more plants. When animals leave an area, that area turns to desert across the world. This has happened again and again and again. And in fact, when you bring in animals, when you bring in livestock, having bunched and herding, moving through an area like a migrating herd, obviously you can overgraze an area and damage it, but done right, you can actually replenish the nutrients in the soil and actually make it much more verdant, much more fertile as well. And so, Alan Savory has been doing this for, I don't know, 40 years or so. He's written textbooks on the subject, and it's reproducible, right? An experiment or theory is only as good as what it's able to predict. And if it's reproducible, that used to be what we had with a peer-reviewed system. Now it's complete garbage. It's just, you just write someone publishes it if they like what you say. It used to be you run an experiment. They didn't publish this really, or they didn't take it seriously unless someone in another lab reproduced it. I said, okay, I followed your steps, I followed your recipe, and I got the same results. It's like if you have a cookbook that gets like different kinds of cookies every time, it's like, well, that's a stupid recipe. That doesn't work. And so his techniques are reproducible. So people all over the world are doing this again and again and again, and making very, very, very fertile land. So that's not true either. Animals managed right actually make the land and the world much, much more hospitable and fertile. Eating in moderation or maintaining a balanced diet. Again, what are we talking about? Balanced with what? A balanced diet, what that actually means is you need the proper balance of nutrients, of macro and micronutrients. You need the right balance because we need specific nutrients in specific ratios. Well, a balanced diet from that definition, where we're getting a perfect balance of all the macro and micronutrients that we need in the proportion that we need them, is a fatty steak, a ribeye steak. So you need fat, you need animal fat. It's an essential nutrient. You also need the lean part of the muscle. That's also an essential nutrient. It has essential nutrients in there. Sometimes having some organs and things like that as well, depending on the individual, depending on how nutritious that animal is. Obviously, we're not eating wild mammoth. They're eating their normal food, or wild horses, or wild animals that are going to be more healthy. Putting things in feedlot, it does reduce the amount of nutrients that they have, but most people can be perfectly fine and have absolutely ample nutrients just on Safeway steaks. If you're not one of those people, throw in some liver, totally fine. But that's a balanced diet. That is an actual balance of the actual nutrients that we need. And then in moderation. Okay, what in moderation? So, there are some things that are just bad. Do you want those in moderation? Well, if you have them in moderation, that's a good way of doing it. If you're going to include something that's harmful to you, then, you should do it moderately, right? So smoking in moderation, drinking in moderation, but, not smoking at all and not drinking at all is clearly better for your health. And then you can extend this out. So cocaine in moderation, heroin in moderation, child abuse in moderation, genocide in moderation. I mean, no, not everything in moderation. I think that's a very silly term. So there are some things that are just bad and you don't want them, or I don't want them anyway. If you're going to do something that's bad, sure, in moderation is great. Why would you be moderate about something that's good for you, right? Do cows need to be moderate in the amount of grass that they eat? Should they eat a balanced diet and eat a bunch of chickpeas and other sorts of plants, or should they eat grass? Should they eat what they are designed to eat and not eat it moderately? Eat as much as they are hungry for. So if you're eating what you're supposed to eat, you eat for what you're hungry for. You can listen to your satiety signals. As far as a balanced diet, some people think, well, you need enough green, you need enough veggies and eat the rainbow, and that's a balance. It's just different colors, which is stupid. Orange is not a nutrient, and and then saying, well, and you need some carbs, you need some protein, and maybe a little bit of fat. Most people are scared of fat, which they shouldn't be. And that's a balance. Well, what that means is you have no idea what we're supposed to eat. You have no idea what we're biologically designed to eat. You have no idea what our optimal diet is, and you're just trying to cover your bases. And that's fair enough, but if you do know and you do understand that biologically humans are carnivores, we've been apex predators for 2 million years. I mean, we teach this to children in school that humans are apex predators, top of the food chain, right? And then we tell them to, mostly eat plant-based. Like, what animal that is an apex predator eats a majority of their calories from plants? It doesn't make any sense. So a balanced diet is, it's just a sort of a statement that doesn't really mean much when you sort of peel it apart.
The just eat in moderation thing, I think that phrase is the cause of so many people yo-yo dieting for years and years and years. It was for me. I was just realizing this. So on carnivore, I'm down almost 50 pounds I'm around a day 120, and I've been doing Lion Diet for about 20 days now. But I just realized I have 13 more pounds to go, and I'll be down 100 pounds from my heaviest. At my heaviest, I was 262. But it took me years and years and years to lose those first 40 or 50 pounds, because I would lose some of it, and then I would eat in moderation. And I don't know if you've seen this book, Dr. Chaffee. It's pretty good. Someone sent me this.
I did, actually. Yeah.
On the sugar blues, and it's talking about how sugar's more addictive than nicotine or heroin, and it's as poisonous, responsible for fatigue, diabetes, heart disease, depression. I've had all of those things, and so it's really frustrating when people say eat in moderation to me, because right now I'm never eating sugar again my entire life. Yeah. It's a drug. It's an addictive drug we've normalized. I hope we're gonna look back like 50 years from now and be like, that was crazy. We were basically giving children drugs, encouraging them from a young age to get hooked on this drug, causes all sorts of health issues for me and for so many people. And then people afterwards are like, well, just do that in moderation. And that's what ends up happening. People try to eat sugar in moderation after losing a bunch of weight on keto or carnivore, and then gain it all back, because it's an addictive drug and you can't have just a little bit of it. You'll end up having more and more and more. So
yeah, well, that's like trying to tell someone to have, cocaine in moderation or heroin in moderation. There are people out there that can probably do it, but not everyone. I've had injuries. I've had major surgeries and things like that from rugby. I've had a couple big injuries. Well, one major injury really when I broke my leg, and I was on painkillers. I couldn't walk for 5 months. I was in absolute agony, and I was on painkillers for weeks after that, and then I was coming off of it, and I was like, okay, I could feel that, that junky, gross withdrawal feeling. But I was like, yeah, I don't want this stuff. I want to actually, be able to move and work out and exercise and all these sorts of things. And other times I had injuries and I was put on painkillers, and you enjoy that. You enjoy that feeling. It does make you feel nice, especially when you play sports all the time. Everything in your body hurts. And so all of a sudden you get painkillers for your knee or your shoulder, and all of a sudden all these other things go away. And you're like, oh, this is what it's like not to be in pain. Like, oh, that's amazing. And you enjoy that. You like that, but it's just like, but I'm not working out as well. My brain's not working right. I'm like, okay, I don't want that. And so, that was never a real big draw for me. But I'm not, that's not, typical. Like, people that get exposed to very addictive drugs tend to want to keep doing them. And so when you're telling people just do a little bit, sometimes, if it's a medication like a painkiller, you have a reason for it, that's one thing. But we're talking about doing these things, recreationally. There's no issue that sugar helps fix. Like, low blood sugar, you take too much insulin or something like that. Sure, have some sugar, have some whatever the hell you can, but that's it. And so just having these things recreationally, and just having a recreational party drug every now and then. I mean, that's you're just going to end up doing more and more and more. There's very few people that are ever going to be able to just be like, okay, yeah, I'll do that once a year, and that's fine.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I get a lot of comments from other carnivores, and sometimes they say I'm being too harsh about it, but that's why I never cheat on carnivore diet. And some people do. They'll say, oh, every now and then I'll have a little bit, or I'll have a cheat day. But for me, I look at sugar, just like you said, it's like heroin or cocaine. And after 42 years, my life is 1,000 times better on carnivore. I no longer have
Yeah.
clinical depression. IBS is gone. I had horrible arthritis in my foot so bad I could barely walk. I was walking
Mm.
around in a brain fog before. I was barely functioning. My life's 1,000,000 times better. So why would I be like, oh, I quit heroin after 42 years. Now I'm just going to dabble a little bit here and have some on Saturday. We'll be fine. There's no reason. I know there's absolutely no benefit to it. I'm not going to do
Yeah.
it. And then the next day be like, oh, gee, I feel great now. I just ate a bunch of donuts or something. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Yeah,
that was
and that's it. It's not good for you, and you don't want that in your body. You feel better without it, and and it's something that you got away from. You quit smoking. You find like, okay, great, I feel better. I quit smoking, and then it's, well, now that I've quit smoking, I can have cigarettes in moderation. Like, no, you just you quit smoking. You either quit smoking or you didn't. And
right.
so, I quit all that stuff, and I have no interest in eating that stuff. People say, well, it takes a lot of discipline. And they're like, wow, that's really impressive. You're so disciplined. I'm like, no, I'm not. I have no interest in eating any of that stuff. It makes me feel like garbage. I know exactly how bad it is for me, and I want that nowhere near my body. And so when people have this stuff there, I mean, I look at it, I remember that it tasted good, smells nice, great. Not interested. I really don't want it.
Right. And there's also something that happens when you become carnivore that I think people, it's hard to explain, but I always say you become the captain of your own ship. You're in total control and you no longer have the food controlling you. So sometimes people will also say, oh, I'll do carnivore, but I still got to have my fruit, or I still got to have my coffee, or I still got to have this. I'm like, no, you don't. Like, why do you have to have coffee? You don't. You quit everything else. Just there's something about being in total control. But here's another one that came through that a lot of people upvoted yesterday. So she said, I lived in Italy where obesity is rare and they have the second highest longevity in the world, despite a diet rich in pasta, pizza, and carbs. How can this be explained? Carrie here with a quick update on the Carnivore Diet Documentary, and then we'll jump right back into the video. I am putting together a Carnivore Diet Documentary following real people over the course of a year, people that are suffering from obesity, diabetes, depression, mental health, aging issues, and we want to see how they do on the carnivore diet for 1 year, and we want to have some expert doctors along with them for the ride. We want to share those examples with the world. I think it's one of the most important things we can do. And so we're making good progress on this, but we're still trying to raise funding so that we can film it and we can do a proper job. And the goal is to get this documentary on one of the big streaming services. So if you're interested in participating in the documentary or donating to it, or just purchasing a shirt, all the funds from this go towards the documentary. And by the way, I'm not making a penny on this. I'm putting my own money and time into it. Just visit www.carnivoredietmovie.com.
Well, first of all, I don't know about the veracity of those statements, and the traditional Mediterranean diet is not one of bread, pasta, and carbs. It's actually one of predominantly meat. My friend, Professor Bill Schindler, who is a professor of anthropology or paleoanthropology and archaeology at the University of Maryland, just retired. He was just over in Sardinia, which is Mediterranean, and it's the epicenter where he was at, the epicenter of the original blue zone identified of people that were living very great age and very good health, well over 100. There were a lot of people living over 100 that were completely independent. They weren't in nursing homes, just crumbling to dust. They were out there being active adults. And this was famously put in the blue zones as largely plant-based, which is a flat out lie. He said that not only are they meat-based, they're nearly carnivore, and they're whole animal-based. So they'll cook an entire sheep on a spit, and then a lot of their family and community will all come together for a big communal dinner. They might have some like locally grown wine, and that's pretty much it. The vegetables that they use are as a seasoning or a garnish. Generally, they just eat meat. They're nearly carnivores, and a bit of wine and some other things as well in the area that he was at. That was traditional. And they also eat plants in a more traditional manner as well. They don't just eat, tomatoes. They certainly don't eat them green. They always vine ripen them. That reduces the toxicity of the tomatoes. Then they would blanch them in boiling water, take the skins off, and then sort of mush them out and separate the seeds from the pulp. And then they'd only use the pulp. So they're separating out the more toxic parts of the plant, and they're allowing it to vine ripen because there are studies showing that if you don't allow fruit to vine ripen, they stay much more toxic, because when the seeds aren't ready, when it's not ripe, the plant puts in a lot of defense chemicals and toxins to stop animals from eating. It makes it very hard as well, so it's more difficult to chew, and there's also more poisons. And if you pick them green, or you pick them before they're fully ripe, it doesn't actually get rid of all those poisons, even if it ripens in the box. Right. So they would do things in a more traditional manner. And I've spoken to many, many, many people, and I've been to Italy as well. What they traditionally ate was not just huge piles of pasta. That's complete myth. They would eat meat mostly, and they'd have a bit of pasta, a bit of bread, things like that. It wasn't carb heavy. So there's a lot of misconceptions. And then, the second highest longevity in the world, I'm not too sure about that. The highest longevity in the world, the highest life expectancy of any population that we measure, as opposed to the primitive, more primal living populations like the Nanette, the Maasai, and the Inuit. They have the highest life expectancy from birth is Hong Kong, that eats the most meat per capita on Earth. Right. And so, and the areas mostly that have the longest life expectancy are the ones that just get away from processed, ultra processed junk food. They just eat real food. Right. So even if you're eating plants, a lot of these places are eating more traditional plants and made in more traditional ways to detoxify them. And they're absolutely including meat. A lot of them are largely meat based, and like Sardinia. And they really, what they do is they get rid of all the seed oils and the sugars and the processed, ultra processed garbage. All that ultra processed garbage is all plant. That's all plant based. The standard American diet is a plant based diet. 70% of the calories come from plants, right? And adults, I think they get somewhere around 40 something percent of their calories from ultra processed food. Kids in America get upwards of 70% of their calories from ultra processed food. And these are ultra processed plant foods, right? These are absolute toxins. These seed oils, these are plant oils, right? Because saturated fat's so bad for you. So you have to replace it with unsaturated fat. Well, that's the plant oils, the polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fatty acids that come from plants, and they are absolutely toxic as hell. Most of these things are like linoleic acid, which is just shown again and again and again to be very detrimental. It damages your mitochondria, destroys them. And when you have damaged and deranged mitochondria, you have set the stage for very serious chronic diseases such as cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and so many more. If Italy is doing better than other people, it's almost certainly because they're eating less ultra processed food and garbage, and not that they're just eating a buttload of carbs and things like that. In fact, they don't. That's not the traditional diet. Whether they're moving towards that now, that wasn't the traditional diet previously, and when people were much more healthy and much less obese. That's what they were eating. They were eating less carbs. They were eating more meat and more animal fats.
Avoiding processed foods. Some people will say, well, you could have done the same thing you did on carnivore by avoiding processed foods, kind of to your point now, but just eating plants only.
Yeah, well, look, and that's why a lot of people go plant-based. They go vegan, vegetarian, and they go, oh my God, my life is so much better. And people ask that, well, then, how are people, fixing their illnesses and feeling so much better by going plant-based? Well, it's not the plants; it's what plants they're not eating now, right? Because they're not eating these ultra processed things. So, yes, that's better. So it's always compared to what, as any economist will tell you, compared to what. So it's like, oh, I'm feeling better compared to what? This diet is better compared to what, right? Well, compared to an ultra processed food diet, well, anything is going to be better than that, but that doesn't mean that it's good for you. That doesn't mean it's better than meat or meat exclusively. It doesn't mean that those plants don't have defense chemicals. It doesn't mean that those plants are entirely safe for you. It doesn't mean that those nutrients are even bioavailable. It just means that you are not getting as bad of an exposure as ultra processed meats. And there's a good way of testing this. Well, first of all, Oreo cookies and heroin are vegan, right? And they're both plant-based, right? So go on the Oreo cookie and vegan and heroin diet, see how you feel. You're not going to feel better, right? So what they feel better doing is excluding these, these nasty plant oils, seed oils, sugars, and processed carbs, and they're sort of getting away from that, it's not because they've stopped eating meat. They threw the baby out with the bathwater on that one, right? Because you put someone on a pure red meat and water diet, all these diseases and problems go away. Okay, so it's not the meat, right? And then you put someone on a clean vegetarian diet where they get rid of all that sort of stuff, and they improve as well. So it's something else. It's something that they're both eliminating, right? And you can ask people that go vegetarian or plant-based or vegan, and they say, wow, I just feel so much better. And you say, okay, is the only thing you changed that you stopped eating meat? That's the only thing that you changed. And they'll automatically say yes, because that's what the word means. It means you stopped eating meat. So, oh, yeah. As soon as I went vegan, everything went better. It's like, okay. So you're still eating cakes and pies and pizza, drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, doing all these things. Oh, no. I stopped all sodas. I don't drink it. I don't eat any sugar. I never eat out at restaurants. I cook all my own food. I've cut down on carbs. I don't drink alcohol. I don't smoke. I don't drink sodas, all these sorts of things. It's like, okay, so you've named about 30 other things that have nothing to do with meat that you changed. And so how can you say that it was dropping the meat? And in fact, we have a lot of people that are former vegans and vegetarians that go to a carnivore diet and they go, oh my God, this completely changed my life. I had no idea that I was so unwell. You can absolutely improve depending on the vegan or vegetarian diet you go on, depending on what you were eating before that. But you could also go on the Oreo cookie and vegan pizza diet as well, which is not a good choice. And eventually you are going to build up issues from the defense chemicals and plant toxins in those foods, and a lot of carbs and seed oils and things like that, which aren't going to be good for you. And if you're on a vegan diet and you're not eating any meat, then you will be vitamin deficient, because there are vitamins and minerals that simply do not exist in plants or fungus that you have to have. And there's essential fatty acids and essential amino acids. Now you can get most of the essential amino acids from plants and things like that. But some people need the so-called non-essential amino acids like carnitine. Carnitine doesn't exist in any plants or any fungus or anything except meat. Carne, carnitine, carnivore, that's Latin for body. So you can only get carnitine from bodies. And that is something that most people make. But only 75% of people make adequate amounts of carnitine, and more carnitine on top of that is actually beneficial. But 25% of people do not make enough and have to have it in their diet. It is an essential amino acid for those people. And we're completely, forgetting about those people. And this is actually one of the causes of autism. It was shown by Texas A&M that carnitine is an integral part of neuron development and mitochondrial function in the neurons, right? And so if you don't have enough carnitine, your brain won't develop properly, your neurons won't develop properly, and you'll develop a certain kind of autism. And this is seen predominantly in vegans and vegetarians, because they're not getting the carnitine from their diet, and so their children are actually suffering. Their brains aren't developing properly, and that's absolutely tragic, because that did not need to happen. That was fully preventable. But apart from that, and that's something that's is a bit of a straw man that the vegans will always do. Like, oh, they say you're not going to get enough protein, but blah, blah. No one has ever said that. It's more difficult. It's not as bioavailable. It's like, oh, well, there's a study showing that, soy protein isolate is just as good. Yeah. Protein isolate, meaning that you went through a chemical production process to strip those amino acids, right? So they're not bound up in the ways that are difficult for us to access, right? So you've done away with the bioavailability. That's not the same thing as just eating a bunch of soy and getting all that. You also get, eat soy, you have protease inhibitors in soy and wheat that make it difficult for you to break down proteins and access the amino acids. So there's a lot of problems with that. So it's more difficult. And again, you need a perfect balance of these amino acids, right? If you're making a barrel and you need these barrel staves, they all need to be the same height, right? So you need enough of all of these things. If one of them is only half the size of the other ones, you're only going to fill half the barrel with water or whatever the hell you're storing in there, right? So they all need to be up there. So if you're missing lysine, if you don't have enough lysine or you don't have enough carnitine, you're not going to be able to make these proteins, right? Because, a protein, things that our DNAs code for are, hundreds, sometimes thousands or more amino acids, right? And so if you don't have enough of a particular amino acid, that protein doesn't get built, right? It stops right there, even if you have all the other ones. So it doesn't matter about the grams of protein that you have. You need the right proportionality. And so that's difficult. So it's not that you can't get a complete protein, except for carnitine. You'll never get that. And so if you're one of these 25% that needs carnitine, you're done. But then B12 does not exist. Even the Seventh-day Adventists, who are religiously anti-meat, they say on how to be vegan and vegetarian, they even say, hey, B12, you can't get this. And this is because, they argue this is the Garden of Eden diet, and God put us on this vegan diet in the Garden of Eden. Therefore, that's the best diet. But they even say then, well, because we were kicked out of paradise, God stripped B12 from plants. And so it's like, okay, so what are you supposed to do? They even say you have to supplement, right? And so, it's something you have to supplement. If you have to supplement, then by definition, your diet is deficient, right? And so that's obviously not what we're designed to eat, because, we can't just subsist solely on it, right? So you'll never get B12, D3, or K2. Let's say kale has all this vitamin K. No, it doesn't. It has vitamin K1. We need vitamin K2. Vitamin K1 is not helpful. And there's like a 1% conversion from K1 to K2. So that's not good enough. There is no retinol. There is no vitamin A in plants or fungus, right? It comes in the form of beta carotene, is carotenoids, right? So you say, oh, well, you can turn those into retinol. Well, some people can. About 45% of people do not have the ability to turn beta carotene into vitamin A, right? This is another clear example of how our species has diverged from a plant-based one millions of years ago to now a carnivorous one. We don't have the ability, half of us don't have the ability to turn beta carotenes into retinol. You have to get vitamin A from meat, or if you have to supplement, and all the essential fatty acids as well, and DHA, EPA. You cannot get these things from plants or fungus. So yes, you could get some early success going plant-based from another plant-based diet, which is the standard American diet. But it's relative. It's not as good. And your time will run out eventually. And unless you're heavily supplementing, you're going to run into trouble with deficiencies. And even if you don't do that, eventually you're just not going to feel as good. And you can experiment. You can do both. Do 3 months plant-based, do 3 months carnivore, and you will know very quickly which one's better.
I don't want to do that again.
No, I don't either. I already know the answer, so
right. Well, it's good you said experiment, because inadvertently I kind of did experiment, because when I realized this, I've had so many people say this to me. They're like, dude, if you would have just eaten plants exclusively, you'd have had the same results you're having on carnivore. And then I was thinking about it. Before doing carnivore, I was on keto. I'd have a huge salad for lunch, a huge salad for dinner. I'd have low-carb vegetables like Brussels sprouts or asparagus, and I have like a little piece of chicken. And I did that for like a year, and I was miserable. I had arthritis in my back and my foot so bad, fatigue, brain fog, depression, anxiety. I did that for a year. And so there's something I'm getting in meat that I'm not getting from those things. And I think maybe it's the fat and cholesterol that's been demonized for so many years. It's balancing out my hormones or something. But that was one of the most significant changes for me on carnivore is my sleep improved almost instantly. I stopped snoring, probably because we were talking last time about the inflammation going down, but depression and anxiety, that I had clinical depression. I was on every SSRI. Those things, I have zero. I don't have any inkling of depression or anxiety on carnivore. And I had it big time before. So there's something in the meat that's giving me that I'm not getting out of plants. I know for sure.
Yeah, well, there's something the meat is giving you that you do not get from plants, flat out. But also there are things in plants that harm you. And so there are things in plants that are designed to harm you, because that's how plants survive. Plants are way older than animals are, and they have been attacked and assaulted by basically everything that's come after them, even other plants. And so they have to have robust defenses. And nothing's made it through the gauntlet of evolution without being able to defend itself, or it goes extinct, right? So everything that's around now is extremely robust. And the main defense mechanism that plants have is by being poisonous. They're sitting ducks. They're stationary. They don't go anywhere. And so they have to be able to defend themselves sitting still. right? And they have a lot, and a lot. We know this inherently. You get lost in the woods, you run out of food. You can't just eat any random plant, right? Most plants will make you very sick or even kill you, right? Most plants will kill most animals, even animals that exclusively eat plants. They eat very specific plants. Sometimes exclusively only one plant. There's 340,000 plants in the world. Koalas eat one. Pandas eat one. Cows, horses, grazing animals eat grass. That's it. But they eat different grasses. Cows and sheep can be on the same paddock because they eat different grasses, so they don't compete for resources. And then if they eat other things, they can get sick or they die, right? And there's entire fields of livestock medicine, talking about, that give names to the different maladies that animals get when they eat the wrong plant. Big head, limp neck, crazy cow syndrome. These are all names for illnesses that come about when an animal eats some plant that it's not designed to eat, and it gets very sick and get very unwell. It can die. And so, that is how the world works. And plants will defend themselves. They'll absolutely defend themselves at the cost of your life. They have no problem with that. Most plants, again, are deadly, right? And ricin is the most toxic thing that we know of on Earth. 1 microgram per kilogram is enough to kill anyone and any animal that we know of. Maybe there's some that are designed to eat that, but there are tons of lectins. This is why we have to cook and prepare, chemically treat different plants in order to reduce the amount of toxicities. Kidney beans, something that's very commonly eaten around the world. If you don't cook those properly, you don't boil them long enough, they are so toxic that 5 of them, just 5 individual beans, can put you in the hospital and have put people in the hospital. And that's reported by the WHO, who push a plant-based agenda anyway. So if they're saying something against plants, you can probably take that to the bank, because they're probably grudgingly telling people about it, right? So there are things in plants that harm you. And eliminating those things from your diet is absolutely going to confer better health, as long as you're eating enough fatty meat.
That's a great transition for this next one. This was right up next on the list too. So vegetables can have an inflammatory effect, like a self-defense mechanism. Whilst this may be true to a certain extent, does it counter the health benefits these foods have?
Yeah, 100%. So look, these things have, and I've spoken to so many botanists about this as well, because, I talk about these sorts of things, and I get, so many botanists that will comment on my videos, will email me and things like that and talk about this. It's like, yeah, we just learned this from day one. I learned this in every botany and cancer biology class I took. I learned this in 7th grade biology, that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them, so they can survive and thrive. And then animals having to adapt to specific poisons in specific plants so they can eat that plant and survive and thrive. So that's where the eucalyptus and koalas come from. They're just nothing else eats eucalyptus besides koalas. Maybe some bugs do, but koalas don't eat anything else either. Right? Because they don't have the defense mechanisms and detoxifying capabilities for other plants as well. So some things are worse than others. Most plants will just kill you. The ones that are so-called edible, while they have some nutrients, they don't have anything that you actually need. They don't have anything you actually have to have. And a lot of it is not bioavailable. That's another way they defend themselves, is by locking up their nutrients in ways that we just cannot access. Think about fiber. That's strings of glucose. We could use glucose. We make glucose. You don't have to have it, but we could use it, but we can't actually access it. No vertebrate animal can break down cellulose into glucose. It's actually the bacteria in the guts of herbivores that eat the fiber. And then as a byproduct, they produce and excrete short chain fatty acids, which are 100% saturated. So even cows and gorillas that are just eating, leafy greens and grass, they're actually getting the majority of their calories from saturated fat. And then those bacteria die off and they absorb those as protein. So they're eating fiber, but they're absorbing fat and protein. We need fat and protein too. That's what runs the animal kingdom. We can't turn plants into fat and protein very well. And so we need to, get that from animals that have already done the hard work for us. But there's so many others, like look at spinach. It has iron and it has calcium, but those are not bioavailable to us. Your iron and your calcium will not go up appreciably. Certainly not calcium. Anyway, there was studies in the 1950s that actually looked at that, because there was like, wow, there's a lot of calcium in spinach. So, on mass spectrometer, right? They run it through a machine and go, wow, calcium lights up. Great, a lot of calcium. Well, when they gave it to people and measured their calcium levels, in fact, they went down. Their calcium levels went down. And so why is that? Well, because calcium that's in spinach is bound up in ways that we cannot break that bond and access. They're not bioavailable. And spinach comes with a ton of oxalates, which turns into oxalic acid in the blood, which if people have know about that can actually be used to strip rust off of houses, or, if you have, clothes or, things around the house or something like that, it just strips off the iron from the rust, right? So it binds up iron in your blood, binds up calcium, binds up magnesium, zinc, other minerals, and pulls them out of your system. 75% of kidney stones are calcium oxalate stones. And so you're stripping out a lot of this calcium, and you actually have to pull calcium from your major store, which is your bones, to keep your serum calcium up, or else your heart stops. So that's a big deal, right? And so, in fact, a lot of these plants are actually counterproductive, even in the nutrients that they are purported to have and provide, because they don't provide them. Now, there are traditional means of accessing these things. You can ferment things that makes them more bioavailable. It makes them less toxic. Certain things, you can't ferment everything. Corn, we got this from people in Mesoamerica. Europeans got it from people in Mesoamerica, and they said, "Oh, corn, easy to grow, grows everywhere, and we can bring it back." What they didn't bring back was the technique called nixtamalization, which is where tamales get their name, and that's a special process, chemical, industrial process, if you will, where they treat these things with a lye and other chemicals and soak them and treat them in certain ways that actually breaks down these bonds to different nutrients that are not bioavailable at all, like niacin, and detoxifies them slightly as well. And so people that were eating these, it was always the poor people that would eat these. People that could afford it ate meat predominantly, and but they were doing okay, right? We took that corn back and we said, "Oh, this is great. People are doing well on it. We'll keep eating it. Tastes good, fine." We didn't bring that technique, and people started dying of pellagra by the millions. We didn't know what that was. We thought it was like an infectious disease or some sort of disease, and someone figured it out that it was actually a niacin deficiency, and you could cure this by giving people niacin or other foods that contain niacin. But the poor people that were reliant on corn because it was the cheapest available grain commodity out there, they were dying in droves. And the funny thing is the ironic thing there is that corn has a ton of niacin. It's not bioavailable, right? And so, that's a thing with plants. So yes, there are good things in plants because they're living organisms. And of course, they have things that are good for other living organisms. They're not necessarily bioavailable. There is absolutely nothing that you have to have. Nothing. There's nothing in plants or fungus that you have to have that you cannot get from meat. But there are things in meat that you have to have that you cannot get from plants. And while there are some good things you can get from plants, depending on the plant, it comes with, you get the bad with the good. And so, look, if you're starving, sure. So this is survival food. This is what the poor would eat historically for thousands of years. And when people ran out of megafauna, they had to switch to grain, but it actually affected our health immediately. The fossil record is very clear. Right before we switched to agriculture, and directly after, there was a sharp decline in height, brain size by 11%, right? We dropped 5 inches. Our brains shrank by 11%. We started getting shorter femurs, which is a sign of malnutrition, signs of tuberculosis in people's spines and bones and things like that, right? Teeth were horrible, crooked, jaws were small and crowded teeth, impacted molars, things like that, or wisdom teeth, I should say, and a bunch of cavities, missing teeth, all these sorts of things. There's a sharp demarcation from the hunter-gatherer, really more hunter approach to agriculture. Right, there's a sharp decline in the average health of people, and that's in textbooks. You don't have to take my word for it. So there are textbooks from Cambridge and Harvard, or Cambridge and Oxford professors showing with pictures and descriptors of these sorts of things. So you can survive on this stuff, and the poor had to for thousands of years, but that doesn't mean that it's the best thing that you can do. It can keep you alive, and that's good. If you're in a famine or you can't afford anything else, then that's what you need to do. There's no problem with that. But is it the best thing that you can do for your body? Absolutely not. No. Meat comes without the strings attached. It's only nutrients. It's only good nutrients, and it's all the nutrients you need. It's a one-stop shop. It's the only food on earth, the only single source food on earth that you can eat exclusively and get everything that you need in the proportion that you need it. Plants, yes, you can get some good things from it. They come with bad things. So automatically, that's worse than meat, right? Because you're not getting all the nutrients you need. You're only getting some, and then it's coming with bad things. Meat doesn't come with any bad things, and it comes with everything that you need. So by definition, it's going to be better than any plant.
All right, here's the next one. Sure, you might feel fine in the short term. I get this one all the time, but I want to see your LDL numbers. I've had that one personally 3 or 4 times. They're like, Kerry, that's great. You don't have depression, anxiety. You can walk now. You don't have the arthritis anymore. You lost 50 pounds. But I want to see your LDL numbers, my friend, because you're going to die pretty soon. What about long-term studies on, this one's a little bit further than that one though, but what about long-term studies on prolonged high LDL cholesterol levels?
Yeah, well, the good thing on that is that we actually have a lot of these things going back to the 50s and 60s, because there's a lot of them put out by the sugar companies that tried to vilify cholesterol, because there's evidence showing that actually sugar was associated with the rise in heart disease, and it was. There is an association there, and there's a very strong association with seed oils as well. There is no association with saturated fat. Saturated fat sort of had a flat line. Animal fats in general had a decline. In fact, there's an inverse relationship with the amount of saturated fat we were eating from the beginning of the 1900s and the rise in heart disease. Inversely related. In the 1800s, we kept very good records going back hundreds of years, and in the early 1800s, we were eating far more meat than we were for the next 200 years until much more recently, and most of that was beef and things like that. And there was no heart disease throughout the entire 1800s, and yet we ate a ton of meat, and we started declining in around 1920, 1930. We sort of troughed at the bottom, the lowest amount of meat that we were eating, and all of a sudden, heart disease starts going up. It's the number one killer in America. While we were eating the minimal amount of meat, and for the last century and a half, we're eating a lot of meat, no heart disease whatsoever. And so, that's, there's just no association. If there's no association, obviously there's no causation. So the great thing about that, the LDL question, is that, there's a ton of studies. And the thing is that they were reported as saying that higher LDL equaled higher risk of heart disease. But we actually know that that's complete crap. The Journal of the American Medical Association actually published in 2016 actual internal memos from the sugar companies back in the 50s and 60s detailing how they paid off numerous professors from Harvard and elsewhere to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was really sugar, and to exonerate sugar and say that it was safe. And one of these Harvard professors was named head of the USDA, and it was he who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration saying that cholesterol caused heart disease, LDL caused heart disease, saturated fat increased LDL. Obviously, everyone needs to stop eating all of the things that contain that, and that's what we did. And what happened after that? Everyone got fatter, sicker, and heart disease rates tripled. They said, well, actually there was a peak in the 1960s, and then that's actually come down since then. It's like, okay, well, that's very disingenuous, because first of all, people stopped smoking as well. That was a major one. And that is not talking about heart disease rates. That's talking about heart disease deaths. And our interventions have gotten a lot better as well. We have open heart surgery, bypass surgery. We have stenting. We can catch these things earlier before they become a heart attack. If you have a heart attack, we can pull the clot out. We can open these things up. We can reperfuse those areas of your heart. People are not dying as much. And we're smoking a lot less too, which is a major, major risk factor for dying of heart disease. But the rates have tripled. Not the deaths, the rates have tripled. So it's very disingenuous to say, oh, there was this peak in the 60s and then it's come down. Oh, that's because we reduced all this cholesterol. No, it's not. That's complete bullshit. Rates have gone up, and they're continuing to go up around the world, right? And we've been taking statins, and we've been lowering cholesterol, and we're doing all these things. It's just getting worse. So obviously that didn't help. But the great thing is that a lot of these studies that were misrepresented, you actually look back at the data and you find like, wow, look at that. No, actually higher cholesterol levels were associated with better health outcomes. So there's something that I was taught in medical school, and you know, maybe the doctors out there, nurses, or other medical practitioners may have been taught this as well during their studies, was the Framingham study. And this is one of the cardinal studies in the cholesterol model of heart disease. And they followed like something like 76,000 people in Framingham, Massachusetts, for I think like 20 plus years, 20, 30 years. And they had all these different markers, all these different, you know, bloods and tests and this and that. And they were just trying to look for as much information as they could. It was a very large study, very wide, broad reach. And what I was taught in medical school was that higher LDL cholesterol equaled, and total cholesterol equaled, higher cardiac related deaths, right? So cardiovascular disease and death, so heart attacks and strokes, right? The problem with that is that the Framingham study actually showed the opposite. It showed that lower LDL cholesterol and total cholesterol conferred with, you know, equated to higher death from heart disease, from heart attacks and strokes, right? So it showed the opposite. So this person's asking, any long-term studies? Yeah, the Framingham study went for, I think, like 30 years, and it showed exactly that. People with lower cholesterol died of heart attacks and strokes more. And in fact, that's what all the big studies that have been published in the last decade have shown, is that the higher your LDL cholesterol, the higher your LDL cholesterol is, the longer you live, the less likely you are to have dementia, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's. And the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, the top cardiology journal in the world, published in 2020, massive literature review looking at all the best studies, all the randomized controlled trials and meta-analyses and all the big studies looking at saturated fat and its correlation with heart disease. And they found no association between increased levels of saturated fat and heart disease. None. And they said there is no reason to have any upper limit or recommendation on the maximum amount of saturated fat to eat. There is none. There is no safe upper limit. You can just eat however much saturated fat you want. There's tons of civilizations around the world that have no heart disease and yet eat extremely high saturated fat. Some from meat, some from coconuts, right? And tocolau, they eat like just a buttload of coconuts and coconut oils and things like that. A lot of saturated fat. Maasai eat very heavily, fat and animal-based, meat and dairy. The Inuit just eat blubber, and when you're looking at people that are eating that way, you see very low levels of heart disease as well. There are some disingenuous studies with the Inuit looking at people that are of Inuit descent, but living in cities, eating, all the normal processed food, alcohol, cigarettes that everyone else is doing. And like, oh, look at that. They have rates of heart disease. Like, yeah, idiot. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about people that actually ate a traditional Inuit diet. And the Inuits actually, at this point, on average, start smoking at 8 years old, right? So that's a big risk for heart disease, right? There's a well-known risk for heart disease. And yet, there was a study in 1993 that was looking at this and saying, hey, they have all these risks. They're just eating blubber. They're just eating tons of saturated fat. They start smoking very young. So there's a very high risk for heart disease. And yet they have much lower rates of heart disease across the population, right? So taking in the traditional and non-traditional eating Inuit, and they have much lower rates of heart disease than the rest of Canadians. And they're like, we wonder if this is genetic. So there's the 5 different markers that showed like your relative risk for developing heart disease. So maybe it would make you more risky or protect you from heart disease. So they thought must be genetic protection and specially adapted against this. And so they looked at their genetic markers and they found no, they actually genetically predisposed to get heart disease. They're more likely to get heart disease. They have all the genetic risk factors for heart disease, and yet they're getting at far lower rates. And they're like, okay, we don't know what's going on. We don't know if there's something else going on or if these, genetic risk factors aren't really actually risk factors. And they just sort of hung up their thinking caps at that point, instead of thinking like, okay, well, maybe this whole idea of saturated fat being a problem was a bit crap. So yeah, LDL was never a problem. That was a complete lie. That is not an opinion. That is not up for a debate. That is a matter of historical record. That is in the published peer-reviewed literature. That is in the history books. That was fraud. LDL is not a problem. Saturated fat is not a problem. Next question.
On carnivore, I keep having my brain is clear, and I'm having these carnivore epiphanies. And one of them has been around studies, which we were just talking about. My entire life, you would hear on the news or social media or whatever, so-and-so study this. They studied eggs. You should eat eggs. You shouldn't eat eggs. You should do this based on this study. And my whole life, I had this misconception that I realize now, that I always kind of thought like, hey, these studies are out here for us, for our health. Like they're doing these studies for the goodness of humanity, to tell us what to eat or not to eat. And now when I look into it more, there's not even a study unless there's a ton of money to be made at the end of it, either from selling some sort of medication or because it was sponsored by a cereal company. Are there studies out there that you can even trust, that don't have any bias in them, I guess is what I'm getting at? Are there studies out there that aren't biased?
It's difficult. Most people will have biases. Others that are sponsored by different grants that don't have strings attached. Those can be good, but the problem is that the majority of studies are exactly that. It's an industry-led study or something that's driving at a medication. Because like what's the payoff at the end? These studies can cost millions of dollars and take years of people's lives. What's the payoff at the end? It's gone are the days of these wealthy benefactors, like Carnegie and things like that they're just going to dump billions of dollars to make the Smithsonian Museum and the Metropolitan and found all these universities and putting grants and just say, hey, explore, experiment, all these sorts of things. I mean, that's what the Nobel Prize was originally for, was to make people so, usually it was $1 million. It's a bit dated how much they get now, but it used to be like you just make these people independently wealthy so they never have to work again. They can just focus on bettering humanity. That was sort of the idea of the Nobel Prize fund, is to help better the world. Things like the NIH, different sorts of grants, government is going to have some strings attached as well, but some of these things are better than others. But a major problem is that, especially for nutrition and these sorts of things, you're driving at a drug, or you're trying to protect a drug. So you're going to be putting out studies that protect your investment, like statins. There are so many studies that show this just very marginal, like fraction of a percent improvement in heart disease. But the way they play with their statistics, like, reduce their risk of heart disease by 46%, like complete garbage. It was less than 1%, total reduction. And that's a big maybe, right? Because it's not from the reduction in cholesterol that's reducing people's risk in heart disease, and it's relatively almost non-existent. But they're protecting their investment. Statins are the most lucrative pharmaceutical that's ever been put on the market, and so they are definitely not going to let go of that cash cow very easily. And because people are on it for decades. And they're telling people now, atherosclerosis starts in your teenage years. So really, like in your 20s, you should be on a statin. You should just be on this for the rest of your life to try to protect you from this. That's garbage. They just want everyone to be addicted to their drugs. This is like going to elementary schools and trying to get people addicted to crack, right? You want a customer for life. You want to start them out right away and keep them going forever. And the longer they're addicted, the longer they're smoking. There you go. I was a kid in the 80s. And they had candy cigarettes. There's bubblegum cigarettes, and you could have these things that had the little paper around it, and you blow through it, and like powdered sugar would come out of it. We looked like smoke. Oh, there, look at that! And we thought it was so cool. It was standing there. Oh, we're smoking, whatever. I mean, no one thought we were smoking. It was stupid, but we thought that was fun. And there were memos from the tobacco companies, like leaked memos talking about that. About like, hey, how can we get kids addicted to smoking and thinking about smoking and wanting to smoke? Like, let's make candy cigarettes and make it cool and fun and turn it into candy and get people thinking about smoking from an early age. They were already thinking about this. So these are drug dealers. These are absolutely nefarious people that are really only worried about their bottom line. They're putting out a lot of research. The sugar companies, the food companies, the processed food companies, all of these people have vested interests, and they put out billions of dollars into nutritional research. So a statistic I saw a couple months ago was that Coca-Cola, just Coca-Cola, spends 11 times the amount of money on nutritional research than the NIH, right?
Wow.
So the National Institutes of Health spend a tenth, less than a tenth, on nutritional research than Coca-Cola does. And Coca-Cola has deep pockets. Obviously, they're able to afford that. People look at those pie charts of like the 7 big companies that just own everything. Coca-Cola is one of them, Pepsi, Nestle, and also Kellogg's cornflakes, right? Dr. Kellogg was a Seventh-day Adventist, who are religiously anti-meat. They think that it's a sin, and God said, don't eat meat. One of their prophetesses, Ellen G. White, had a vision from God in the 1800s saying that we should stop eating meat. We should have a Garden of Eden diet. And meat makes you lustful. Meat makes you horny, basically. It makes you self-gratify. That they thought that was, the temperance leagues, that was about temperance was not masturbating. I thought that was just the greatest sin. She wrote a book saying that if you allow your child to, masturbate, that's like putting a gun to his breast and pulling the trigger. They end their life, instantly in that moment, right? As they masturbate once, that's it. Their lives are over. It was very, very severe stuff. And Kellogg was a protege of hers, and he was transcribing these sorts of things into typesetting them and stuff like that. So I mean, it's just ingrained in this guy's head since he was like 11 or 12, and he went after this, became a doctor at the sanitarium, the Battle Creek Sanitarium for Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California. Still there, still a Seventh-day Adventist medical school, and you can't go to Loma Linda Medical School unless you are a Seventh-day Adventist, and they have sanitariums and hospitals, hundreds of them all over the world. He started Kellogg's cereals. This was in order to suppress people's natural urges so they wouldn't have sex or masturbate. That's the way he was intending to do that. And they were all going on a plant-based diet in order to suppress their hormones, become less healthy, and become less interested in sexual reproduction, which is a sign of health. As if you want to reproduce, your body's telling you, hey, you're healthy, you're good, you have enough resources to have kids. And that's the point of life, is to have kids, procreation. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church founded, I think it was called Sanitarium of the Foods in Australia and elsewhere around the world. Some of the major processed food producers in the world are owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They enjoy tax-exempt status, in fact. And they're one of the biggest, food producers, processed food producers in the world, and they're pushing this agenda, and they are pumping out tons and tons and tons of research and things like that. So yeah, it's very difficult. You have to look at these studies. You have to look at the the methods and the results. And you have to sort of decide for yourself. Are they coming to conclusions that are borne out by the experiment that they're doing. And again, you have to look at where they're coming from. This is coming from anyone. If this is peer reviewed by Loma Linda or something like that, just throw it out. And if this is coming from something industry, I mean, there was a study that was trying to say about Coca-Cola. If you gave rats a bunch of Coca-Cola, and different sorts of things, they actually lost weight. I'm like, okay, I wonder who funded that one.
Wow.
And so, I mean, it's just some of the stuff is just nonsense. And so, yeah, it's difficult, so I think you have to go, because you can muddy the waters, and that's what they do, right? They were like, oh, well, look, we've got 60 studies saying this and 40 studies saying that. It's just a bit mixed. We just, but until next time, just keep buying my Necco wafers, because
right.
we don't have clear evidence that this is bad for you. And so you keep pushing this stuff out there, or it comes out, high fructose corn syrup is super bad. Oh, well, we'll just go to cane sugar. Oh, it's so much better. It's chemically identical, right? So it's just like, cane sugar is a disaccharide, right? Sucrose is 50% fructose glucose. High fructose corn syrup is 53% fructose, 47% glucose, or 55-45. I'm like, it's the same stuff. Right. And so, so they're just playing games, really. And no, but it's very difficult. So you have to go back to first principles. What kind of animal are we biologically? What have we been eating for 2 million years? That's what we're adapted to. That's what our bodies are designed to eat, or, go by other methods. What have we been eating? What are we designed to eat? What were we eating in the 1800s when the obesity rate was 1.2%? Right? What were we eating in 1940 when the obesity rate was 6%? What were we eating in the 1970s when obesity was 13%? What are we eating now? The obesity is 42%,
Right.
right?
It's so
Right.
funny because I have people telling me, hey, this carnivore thing, it's a fad diet. It's not going to work. And my response lately has been, no, the standard American diet is a fad diet. If you look at the entirety of humans eating food, what we're eating now is just a little sliver of paper right now. And everything you just said, obesity's through the roof, heart disease is through the roof, diabetes, depression, anxiety, eating the way people are eating just in this small little sliver of time. And it's like humans ate the way I eat forever and they were fine, and now all these issues are happening. But it's so funny how confused people are. But the other thing on the studies, the other carnivore epiphany I guess I've had lately, you kind of touched on this, but and from reading this book more, is that is there any industry in the world right now that's worth more money or revenue than sugar? Because like if you look it up, if you Google what's the biggest industry, it's usually like tech is the biggest industry, but everybody has to eat. And if you look at sugar, like you were saying, you have Coca-Cola, Nestle, all the cereal companies. You go to the grocery store, sugar is in everything. And so is it so crazy that every economic driver is pushing us towards eating sugar more? And every study you see, this was something I was thinking about last week. It was like, hey, if you really want to sell more sugar, the best way to do it isn't even to promote or advertise sugar, even though they do that and there's cereal commercials for kids and you get them hooked young and all of that. But it's just simple. It's just demonize meat. If you demonize meat and you make meat evil and it's going to kill you, what's going to happen? You're not going to eat meat. The only thing that's left to eat, everyone does it. You end up going to the grocery store. You end up eating a bunch of carb, junk, processed food with sugar in it. You're going to sell so much more sugar if you have all these studies telling us meat's going to kill you. Meat's going to clog your arteries. And
yeah. Well, the sugar companies make around $1.3 trillion a year, so this is not small business. Right.
And then all the companies that have sugar in their products, they're like subsidiaries
even
of
more
the sugar companies.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and you're exactly right. What do you replace, the meat and fat with? You're going to replace it with carbs and sugar, and really sugar. And that was actually argued by the sugar companies since the 50s. And Ansel Keys, who was one of these paid shills, an absolute piece of garbage, it's human debris, who came up with the cholesterol theory of heart disease. He knew this was not the case. He was being paid to do this by the sugar companies. He got on cover of Time magazine, all these sorts of things, became a very influential person based on that theory. And so he was never going to give it up because his entire reputation and career hung on that. And so even though he damn well knew that the opposite was true, and he even ran randomized controlled trials with thousands of patients, reducing, eliminating saturated fat and replacing it with unsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fats. And in fact, they found that, yes, you reduce your LDL cholesterol and people started dying of heart disease and strokes, right? So people died. People were getting worse. They had to stop the study. They buried the study. Why'd they do that? Right? Because it didn't show what they wanted it to show. And they got it uncovered decades later. And then you ask them, like, well, why did you cover this up? Was it a bad study? Something went wrong? Like, no, there's nothing wrong with the study. Just weren't really, excited about the results. It was like, well, that's completely dishonest and not ethical. And that's why, because he was paid to do that. So he was saying too, it was like, well, fats are so bad for you. What you should do is just stop eating fat. But then, you need these calories. So what are you going to do? Well, you can replace it with sugar because it's just an empty calorie, right? That's where that term comes from. Empty calorie is from that. When they're saying sugar is, well, it's an empty calorie, but you need calories. You need enough energy to live, right? So just when you take, because most people were getting a lot of their calories from fat, right? A lot of their energy from fat. And so they say, okay, well, you need to get rid of that. And then you should replace it with sugar. And he was saying, he's like, well, look, it may be that, cholesterol is not a cause of heart disease, but it could be, And so what's the harm in just not eating the fat, just replacing it with sugar, which is an empty calorie, and, you could be protecting yourself from heart disease. If you're not, you haven't lost anything, Well, no, you have lost a lot of things because sugar is harmful. It's toxic. It's a drug. It causes a dopamine response to the addiction centers of your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and meth. And there are MRI studies showing that fructose will kill the same areas of your brain as meth to the same extent as meth. All right. And fructose, it gets metabolized and broken down in the same byproducts in your liver as ethanol, alcohol. Right. So you get the same diseases and damage to your body from fructose as you do from the breakdown products of alcohol. You get cirrhosis, diabetes, heart disease, fatty liver, and even cancer and Alzheimer's are implicated and connected to sugar consumption, right? So you're getting a lot of bad things and you're losing this very essential nutrient, which are saturated fats, which the majority of human beings have gotten the majority of their calories from time immemorial. I mean, it's just that's always been that way. And animals in general get the majority of their calories from saturated fats. You know, except maybe there's some insects that eat, you know, and birds that eat nectar and things like that. God knows what they're turning that into. But, you know, everyone else, you know, all the other animals, you know, that eat fiber or eat other animals, they are absorbing fat and protein. And that's what we need. We do not need carbohydrates. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. That is not a thing, and that's well recognized in medical and biological institutions. And there are entire civilizations that have never eaten carbohydrates or very rarely eat carbohydrates, and there's absolutely no deleterious health outcomes that have been observed in those populations. So there's no carbohydrates that you need. You do need saturated fat. You do need fat soluble vitamins. You do need certain amino acids in certain proportions. And so, you know, just saying, oh yeah, well, just stop eating meat, stop eating fat, and just replace it with sugar. That was by design. That's been going on since the 1950s. And then when they did that, since the 1970s, we reduced fat significantly. We reduced saturated fat and cholesterol by 35%, reduced red meat by, you know, upwards of 35%, replaced a lot of that with chicken. So the total amount of meat that we were eating didn't necessarily change, but we certainly reduced the amount of red meat and eggs that we were eating. And saturated fat, you know, went down, right? And what did we do? Everything tasted bland and terrible. Everything was carb based, and that tastes like crap if it doesn't have fat in it. And so they added sugar because that was the only thing that made it taste good. And then we increased the amount of high fructose corn syrup we were eating by over 3 times, increased the amount of seed oils by over 3 times since the 1970s. And heart disease has increased over 3 times. Obesity rates have increased well over 3 times. And all these other diseases and chronic diseases and issues have all continued to increase decade after decade after decade. And the rate of increase is continuing to rise. So we're only getting worse. So whatever we're doing now, it's not working. And we need to go back and look at what we were doing before that when we did not have this problem, which was eat fatty meat. Don't eat this processed crap.
All right, here's one final question. It said if everyone ate meat and started carnivore diet, the whole world basically, there wouldn't be a way to produce enough.
Says who? You know, I mean, that's assuming a fact that's not in evidence, you know, and in fact, you know, what we were talking about before is that more animals equal better environment, more fertile land, more plants, and better ecosystem. So in fact, the more animals we produce, the better the land's going to get, and the more animals we're going to be able to produce. And so you look at this with Alan Savory and other people that are learning from him and learning other regenerative management, you know, techniques with their animals, and they're regeneratively, you know, raising these animals. They can grow more animals on a smaller piece of land because it's making the land so much more fertile and vital. And so if you do that, you actually make the land better. So the more animals you have, you know, run properly, the more that land will be able to produce. The middle of America was one of the most fecund and fertile places on earth when we first came to it. The grass was so tall, the early explorers said that it was tall enough that they could tie it in knots over their horse's head while they were on horseback, right? So these things were over 9 feet tall. They were reporting. There were hundreds of millions of buffalo. There were hundreds of millions of other large game animals, you know, like deer and antelope, you know, home on the range. There's no deer and antelope there anymore. But, there were hundreds of millions of these things, probably billions of these animals all over the place. And the more animals actually made the land more fertile. Right. And so, we see this in Africa when there aren't enough animals to manage the land, basically. It goes to desert, turns to desert. So we actually need more animals. So the more animals we produce, the better able we will to restore these deserts. I mean, Savory is literally reversing deserts around the world, himself and the people he's working with and the people that are taking his teachings and taking that to other places around the world. He's literally reversing deserts. And, the more animals that you have, in fact, the more land we will reclaim and will become more fertile and more accessible. They can actually grow more food as well. If you want to have a mixed diet, it actually makes it more fertile. The more animals you have, the more food we'll have, the better the environment will have, the more availability that we'll have, and the more animals will be able to run on the same piece of land. Also, you have to remember that in order to make a city, you need a lot of flat area, right? In order to have a farm, you need a lot of flat area. So they're competing for space, right? This is the arable land. So cities compete with farmland for arable land. Now you can have cows on arable land too, but you don't have to. You can run cows, you can run animals on rangeland and forest land. You can easily do this. And a lot of people do that. And you don't need to chop down the rainforest. You just have the animals, living in that area. And it's not great to tear it down anyway, because it's horribly unfertile. It's very, very barren for nutrients. So they tear up all this rainforest in the Amazon and put a bunch of soy plants and things like that, and they're actually terrible. They have to use a ton of petroleum-based fertilizers and animal-based fertilizers as well, and it's just terrible. It's terrible farmland. Arable land makes up 4% of the Earth's surface. When we're including the oceans and things like that as well, right? So 4% of the Earth's surface is arable land, right? 10% is forest land. I think 15% is rangeland, about 25% for both anyway. I may have mixed those two up. So there's far more land available that you can run animals on than you can grow crops on, right? You can run animals on any land, basically, but you can only grow crops on 4% of the Earth's surface. Also, because of how destructive growing crops is, especially commercial farming is to the land, we are losing 27.5 billion tons of topsoil a year just by our farming techniques. And that is a very limited resource. We only have topsoil takes about 500 years to grow 1 centimeter, half an inch, right? 500 years. And we're losing 27.5 billion tons. That's an area the size of Kentucky every single year. Right, that's going to run out, and so that's why we have to use tons and tons and tons of petroleum-based fertilizers and things like that, which is another reason to get rid of animals, because the big oil companies they sell more product, right? They need more petroleum-based fertilizers, and the more plants that we produce, the more fertilizer they can sell, right? So that's another vested interest that you have to think about as well. So it is estimated, and by the people who estimate these things, that we probably only have about 50 growth cycles left on Earth. And then it's done. And we run out of topsoil, we run out of the nutrients. The nutrients in spinach or tomatoes or whatever, avocados, is about 1/3 now what it was in the 1950s. Right. And that's because the soil is devoid of these nutrients, right? Because we're not having animals on them. Even in the Bible, it said every 7th year, you don't grow anything. You just let animals come back and eat and live and grow and all that sort of stuff. And then you can go back, right? Because those nutrients have to get back in the soil or they don't grow, because plants, tear up and bring out nutrients out of the soil. So you have to put them back in before these things are going to grow again. So they're doing that in the most, cheap and useless way, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. So that was something someone said, was that we have about 50 growth cycles left, and so we're trying to speed that up by getting rid of animals and getting rid of their manure, and making people more reliant on plant-based foods and crops. So we have to have more crops, and we'll have to do it quicker, and that's not sustainable. So if everyone ate plants, well, first of all, everyone would die because you wouldn't get proper nutrition, right? Because it's nutrient devoid, right? So you have to have meat anyway. And if we continue to eat plants and we continue to largely eat plants and we don't ramp up our animal agriculture and start accounting for the fact that we are destroying the land, we are turning massive areas of the planet into deserts, like the Sahara Desert. That's man-made. Middle East, those are man-made deserts. Read Gilgamesh. This modern day Iraq. It's talking about these green fields and plains and deer and antelope and animals just running around, massive cedar forests and all these sorts of things. That's what it used to be before agriculture. And then that's absolutely destroyed the land. Egypt, the pyramids and the Sphinx, those were not deserts at the times that they built those things. They look at the soil sample in the 1990s underneath the pyramids and the Sphinx, and they found that actually this is more consistent with jungles, what you'd see in a jungle. And so these were jungle pyramids. These were jungles. That's a jungle Sphinx. These were jungle people. And then they had all this widespread agriculture, just destroyed the land, turned it into a desert. It's still a desert to this day. That came from plants. We did that in the middle of America during the Dust Bowl era. Again, because of crops, because of farming, the wind would pick up the topsoil, blow it all away. The rain would hit, wash it all away. And then we had the Dust Bowl. All the topsoil was gone. We had these big dust storms because it picked up all this dust and all the topsoil and just blew it around. Massive storms the last 3 days. And you just couldn't see anything. You couldn't go outside. Terrible. People had locust swarms and all these sorts of things. People thought it was the wrath of God. It was like something out of Exodus. People thought that people thought that this was God being, mad at them for some reason, probably alcohol or masturbation or whatever the hell Kellogg was coming up with at the time. And they figured out, no, actually this is from how we're planting crops. And so they changed that. So instead of having a row 6 miles long, they have these scallop patterns, right? That's one of the techniques that they changed at the time. Instead of just having this big row that you could just have this water just wash it all away, or the wind pick it up and blow it all away. But even then, we are still losing 27.5 billion tons of topsoil a year. So that's going to go. That's going to be gone. At the time, we almost turned the middle of America into a desert. We almost turned it into another Sahara Desert. Thankfully, we headed that off. People in ancient Egypt, people in Africa, they didn't figure it out in time. And we actually have satellite images, infrared images from space, looking at what is now the Sahara Desert, seeing cities and human, man-made human dwellings all over what is now the Sahara Desert. That is man-made. That was not a desert before we started agriculture and destroying the land. So, in fact, if we don't start eating meat and don't start eating more meat and probably don't really largely go to meat-based, then we won't be able to produce enough food, and we are going to have a major, major problem on our hands.
It's so interesting. It's like everything that we think is usually the opposite. I'm learning that more and more in carnivore. And what you're saying is, I've seen it with my own two eyes. So we're living on a 20-acre homestead here. We got eight years ago. And one of the first things we did, this was pre-carnivore, of course, was try to make our own garden. And it took years before we got anything out of the garden. And it was just ridiculous in retrospect. You got to amend the soil. You got to put seashells crushed into the soil. You got to add fertilizer. You got to flip it over. We did all that. And we got a couple measly cucumbers out of it after several years of doing it. But meanwhile, not even a mile down the road from me is where I buy all of my grass-fed beef from my neighbor. He's a beef farmer. And these cows, I see them every single day. I drive past them every single day. They transfer them from field to field, and it's just big, beautiful green grass, like the brightest grass I've ever seen. It doesn't even look real. That's 1 mile from here, and I can't grow a cucumber in the ground a mile away from him. So it's like so much of this stuff you hear, this frankly vegan propaganda, like, oh, you're destroying the whole earth. And I'm like, well, I'm looking at this with my own two eyes. I'm eating one cow from my neighbor that gives me hundreds of meals, and you're eating these vegetables and all of this different multitude of variety of different vegetables and just tearing up ecosystems and soil and putting fertilizer in and all of this stuff. It's like you just sometimes gotta just look with your own two eyes and make your decision from there. But I was just going to say, on the vegan propaganda thing is like, yes, it is, but really what it is, it's the Seventh-day Adventist propaganda. It's Kellogg's propaganda. It's Coca-Cola's propaganda and Nestle's propaganda and Pepsi's propaganda. That's what it is. And they're the puppet masters behind this. The people that are vegan. I mean, obviously they're the
the ringleaders and things like that are probably profiting greatly from this. But, the people that are just sort of buying into it, and I mean, a lot of them have the exact same motivations that you or I would, which is, trying to eat what's healthy and be healthy and live a good life, be respectful for the environment, be respectful of, the world around us. And in fact, they're just being really just led down the wrong road. And again, nutritional science is fraudulent. Okay. The Seventh-day Adventist Church invented it. They invented the school of nutritional study and dietetics in America. So they invented those institutions, and they founded the university courses for nutritional sciences. They founded these in, was it the American Nutritional and Dietetics Association or something like that. They founded that in 1917. They wrote the first textbook on nutritional sciences taught at universities. It was taught for decades after that, and like the most current iteration of that, current version of that, is still being taught in universities, in Ivy League university nutrition classes. So this started out as vegan propaganda, as Seventh-day Adventist propaganda. And they still set the curriculum for nutritional sciences. Because, doctors need to be taught nutrition. Oh God, no. Thank God we weren't taught nutrition, because it would have been that propaganda that is absolutely false as hell. The Seventh-day Adventist Church has actually started a medical specialty called lifestyle medicine. This is a specialty all around the world. You can get board certified in it, or you can get like a fellowship in it. And it is all about eating plant-based, getting rid of meat, and moving your body. And they base that on the Garden of Eden diet. They're like, that's what Adam and Eve did. They were just eating plant-based, and that's actually not true. There's a lot of scriptures that say that they ate meat in Garden of Eden, and certainly after Noah, and that there was eaten in heaven historically, and then in the next life, people will be eating meat as well. And there's tons and tons and tons of references in the Bible of people eating meat and how good this is, and how we're and God's gave us all the animals to eat and all these sorts of things, and we'll be the masters of all and all that sort of stuff. So that's just wrong in general, but that's what they're basing this on. And I swear to God, this is on their website on the lifestyle medicine. They say, because God is the author of science, then the Garden of Eden diet is therefore evidence-based. I swear to God, they say that. So like, I have no issue with religion or whatever anybody believes. That is not evidence based. That is just an absurd statement. And so you're not allowed to question that. And Ellen G. White said that you are not allowed to question. Modern day science is not allowed to question the word of God. That's above science, right? Science is about questioning everything and asking questions to find out the answers and find out the truth. And so they're saying that this is evidence-based because it's, what people ate in the Garden of Eden. And of course, there are other scriptures that say, no, actually they were eating meat, and they certainly were eating meat after that. But that's what they think. And that's what they're taught. And so I think that was in 2003 that lifestyle medicine became a specialty. And so there are people all over the world that are like this. That Dr. Id's character that goes around, trashing people. He has nothing to show for himself. He just, talks trash about other people. And he shows that he's a lifestyle medicine specialist. So he is one of these Seventh-day Adventist religious indoctrinated sort of people that are just pushing this religious agenda from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It was a very, very isolated, specific religious agenda, but they're not that isolated. There's 22 million of them around the world, and they occupy some of the highest positions in nutritional studies. And like Walter Willett at Harvard, he's Seventh-day Adventist. Most of the WHO Nutritional Board, they're all Seventh-day Adventists, vegans, vegetarians. The 2015 paper from the WHO saying that processed food was a low-grade carcinogen. The people that put that out were vegans and Seventh-day Adventists, and there were other people on the board that said, no, this is bullshit. You're throwing out extremely good high-level studies that go against your narrative, and you're including really poor studies that support it. This is crap. And you should declare your biases, that you're Seventh-day Adventists and you're vegans and vegetarians. And they refused. And but people listen to this stuff. It's appealing to authority, well, because, teacher said so, therefore it's true. Well, teacher has an agenda, and that's just true in general anyway. But, it's that's what's going on here. It's not the vegan propaganda. Where's that coming from? It's not people independently come across this. This is being spoon fed to them by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, from Kellogg's, from Coke, from Pepsi, from Nestle, and they've been doing it for over 100 years, really 150 years is when they started doing this nonsense. Well, if people want to know more about that, about those ties, there's a lady named Belinda Fettke, Fettke, and she did a lot of work. She had years of research into the origins and ties in nutritional sciences with Seventh-day Adventist Church and all the different sorts of industries. They are entirely corrupt. And she spells it all out. She's like, just has, has names and dates for all these sorts of things. And she's got a ton of talks on YouTube where she gives lectures at different medical conferences and other sorts of platforms as well. So, I just did a post on her as well and had that link, but, people can look her up by name and, just Belinda Fettke and nutrition, Seventh-day Adventist, things like that. They'll find a lot on that.
This has been wonderful. I really appreciate everything you're doing, Dr. Chaffee. Seriously, I tell people, a lot of new people, new to carnivore, they get inspired hearing my story or other people's story, but it's so important that you go out there and arm yourself with the truth and the facts, and there's so much great information out there. So I've got a link to Dr. Chaffee's YouTube channel. You also have the Plant Free MD podcast, which is amazing. Recently saw you on your 60 Minutes interview, which was great. So highly encourage everyone, go check out Dr. Chaffee's YouTube channel, subscribe. That's the biggest thing. It's amazing the amount of research and information we have at our fingertips. And sometimes people will come to my channel and be like, Carrie, tell me what to do. What should I eat? What should I do? It's like, go do your own research. The information is out there. So I really genuinely appreciate everything you're doing. Carnivore has completely changed my life. And if it wasn't for you and other people sharing the truth and all this information out there, I would still be 100 pounds heavier right now, and with arthritis and depression and a million other issues. I'm sure of that. So thank you very much for everything you're doing.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. It's really good to hear that you're doing so well. I mean, that's why I started sort of letting people know. I saw how much better I was doing, how much better my family was doing. I really was digging into the research, going, okay, what do we know? What can we prove? And I was like, wow, we've been really sold a false bill of goods. And I just really took that personally because, I have had a lot of family members affected by these sorts of diseases that really, obviously I didn't want to see anyone suffering, people dying prematurely that shouldn't have. And, if you think about, just the heart disease getting worse and worse and worse, and we're being fed the thing, we're saying this is the cure and it's in fact the cause. You're talking about hundreds of millions of people around the world who have suffered and died prematurely and had decades of excess pain and suffering and ill health as a result of that, really billions at this point, and so, if you can't get passionate about something like that, when it's talking about billions of people suffering and dying prematurely, I don't know what you can get passionate about. And so I'm certainly passionate about this. And it's always really good to see people like yourself, take it on board and improve their life, because that's what it's all about. I just want people to be healthy. I don't want to have to, treat people. Dr. Philip Ovadia is a cardiothoracic surgeon, and he wrote a book called Stay Off My Operating Table. Just eat meat. Stop eating all this processed crap. You just eat a carnivore diet. You will not ever need, bypass surgery. And I think that's a very powerful message, when you're telling people, hey, please stop doing these things, and you don't need my services. I don't want to have to, pick up the pieces. I want to make less money. I want doctors to be less needed, because like this is sick care. This is not health care. We're managing chronic illnesses and just letting people just die slowly over decades. That's wrong. We need to be getting people healthy so they don't need health care. They don't need medications in the first place, and they don't need to take supplements like you do on a vegan diet. You don't have to take, any sort of special pill or remedy or this. You just eat properly and allow your body to work, and it will. The natural state of humanity is one of health. The natural state of all animals is one of health. We are the sickest, most diseased animals on earth. And that's a very new thing. And it shouldn't be that way. It's not in our genes. It's in our food. And as soon as we recognize that, and people are, they're just getting better and better. And I hope to see the day that that this becomes old news, and people are just like, yeah, that's just what you do. You just eat this way, and you'll be healthy. And I'm working towards that.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time. This has been great.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
I am putting together a carnivore diet documentary following real people over the course of a year, people that are suffering from obesity, diabetes, depression, mental health, aging issues, and we want to see how they do on the carnivore diet for 1 year, and we want to have some expert doctors along with them for the ride. We want to share those examples with the world. I think it's one of the most important things we can do. And so we're making good progress on this, but we're still trying to raise funding so that we can film it and we can do a proper job. And the goal is to get this documentary on one of the big streaming services. So if you're interested in participating in the documentary or donating to it, or just purchasing a shirt, all the funds from this go towards the documentary. And by the way, I'm not making a penny on this. I'm putting my own money and time into it. Just visit www.carnivoredietmovie.com.